Last week we talked about overcoming our fear of speaking the truth. Today the theme is seeking the truth. A number of you have asked me to speak about the topic of racism, so we're going to try seek the truth as best we can with regards to racism. We're going to try to find out what's morally true, what are the facts, and how we can contribute to its eradication. Jesus' teaching in the gospel gives us some guidance in our search for truth, and there are 3 points here. First, he says, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." This teaching is very difficult. It was difficult just for us now, just as it was back in Jesus' time. For the Jewish people, family was so important. But the question still we all have to ask ourselves, do we love Jesus more than our family? And as I've said many times before, if we love Jesus more than our family, we're not going to love our family less. We will, in fact, love them more than we already do. Now, that said, as the Catechism states, family ties are important, but they're not absolute. Jesus says that he is the truth. He is the truth. So we're going to have to look at his teaching again from this perspective. Look at the change in words. Whoever loves father or mother more than truth is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than truth is not worthy of me. And this is actually beautiful if we love the truth more than our family. Because once you do, you can no longer be pushed around by the crowd. You can no longer be manipulated. A lot of us are going to have to train ourselves to do this because this does not come naturally. We actually have to train ourselves to love the truth above everything else. We're not used to it because our society teaches us that all truth is relative, and that's not true. And they teach us that family, friends are the most important criterion, but truth is even more important. Second point, Jesus says, "Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me." We usually use this saying of Jesus to talk about bearing the inconveniences of life, and that's entirely true. But when Jesus was speaking these words to his audience, to his disciples, he was talking about, I need all of you to be ready to embrace this shameful death. So those Christians, those followers of Jesus, they knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. In those Roman times, when the Romans crucified people, they did it in public. They did it along the roads to intimidate a population into conformity. You do this, otherwise we crucify you. And so Jesus is saying to us, if we love him, if we love the truth above all else, a cross is coming. A very serious, painful cross is coming. And we shouldn't be surprised at that. Third point, whoever finds their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. We have to conform ourselves to the truth. We constantly have to adapt ourselves to do that. And whenever we learn something new, we have to conform ourselves to that truth. And that involves a kind of dying to ourselves. You know, whenever you have to admit that you're wrong, because you learn something that's more true, it feels like you're dying. You know, I told you, I think it was 2016, that I can't do spiritual direction for all of you now. As your pastor, I have to focus on leadership, sacraments, and preaching. And that was a dying to self. When I learned that truth, in this position as pastor, I want to do spiritual direction for all of you, but I can't. That involved the death to self, but it brought new life. Because I started realizing that if I do my primary priorities as your pastor, this is actually better for you. I can actually love all of you better. And ultimately, this is better for you. Some of us are stubborn, and we cling to our opinions even when we receive new factual information. It feels good to say, oh, I'm not mistaken. It feels good to never have to change our opinion or our views or our attitudes. But if they're mistaken attitudes and we don't admit that, we're just fooling ourselves. Life is not about being right. Life is not about appearing right in front of other people. The point of discussions is not to win. What's the point of having a discussion? To know the truth. And ever since I learned this, that what is the point of a discussion? It's not to win. If it's to find the truth, now, in 20 years since I've adopted this mentality, I've never lost a discussion. Why? Because I'm not in it to win it. What's the win? Learn the truth. So every time you correct me, I win, no matter what. If I modify my position even by a little, I'm more conformed to the truth, I win. So it's incredible freedom here. So let's take these principles and try to apply them to racism as we're seeking the truth regarding racism. I'm going to make 4 points. First point is we're going to start with moral principles. Should be obvious to everyone that racism is a grave moral evil. We should feel righteous anger whenever someone is unjustly discriminated against, and I hope all of us do. It's a wonderful sign, it was a positive sign when there is a moral outrage at the way George Floyd died. The suffering he endured for people who are meant to protect us, they caused his death. Another moral principle. Some of us have also been personally affected by racism. I mentioned to you in my family history this one time, this one example. At a certain point in my parents' courtship, some of my Chinese members wouldn't accept my Caucasian mother. Another example, there's a survey by Angus Reid. It showed that half of Chinese Canadians have been insulted since the pandemic, and 43% of them have been threatened or intimidated. To seek the truth, we need to acknowledge our pain, including our pain, our personal pain. And when we acknowledge it, then we seek healing. We should also do everything we morally can to end racism, which means never being racist ourselves, teaching other people not to be racist, and then correcting people who are. We should participate in events and peaceful protests to end racism. But as Christians, the most important thing we do is we pray for people's conversion, the conversion of heart. There should also be a condemnation of riots and looting because the ends don't justify the means. To say riots are wrong, that doesn't mean we're being light on racism. One moral error is to say, because racism is so heinous, any means necessary to eradicate it is justified. That's a moral error. Another moral error would be, because racism is so heinous, it's understandable if people loot, if people riot. That's morally incorrect, because evil is never corrected with more evil. We should follow moral forms of protest. I told you once about an event in 1955. In Alabama, 40,000 Black Americans for 1 year refused to take the bus. And that was at great personal hardship. They didn't take the bus to and from work. Very sacrificial. But what it did is it crippled the bus's finances. And that's a good moral form of protest. And finally, there should be a healthy respect towards police officers and lawful authority. Respect doesn't mean we can never criticize. Respect means we hold people to a very high standard. Second point, we have to search for the facts. Moral principles on racism are clear, but sometimes the concrete facts are disputed. Is there systemic racism in Canada? How much? Against whom? How much corruption is there in the police? What are the facts regarding racism in Canada, as opposed to the US, as opposed to other countries? Now, some people might object to these questions even being raised, thinking there are obvious answers. There might be obvious answers, but people are still allowed to ask the questions in order to verify facts. Right now, there's a strong tendency to shout people down who disagree with the common consensus. That's not right. In order to think, in order to learn, you need to be able to ask questions freely. You need to be able to listen for answers. Many people are against racism, but we might disagree about what we know about the current situation and what's the best way to fight it. I want to give you 4 very simple principles about having a good discussion. Number 1, When we lay out the facts as we know them, be dispassionate. We have to give people an opportunity to receive what we're saying, to absorb it. We never want to force people to accept what we're saying immediately. Be dispassionate. Number 2, focus on one topic rather than jumping around. You know how sometimes we do that in conversations? We go all over the place, and the conversation is very loose, and we're not arriving at any truth. We're just hopping around with a continuous stream of consciousness. So, for example, I might share an experience about racism in Vancouver, and then I'll nationalize it to Canada, and then I'll somehow bring it back to my own personal experience. We can't do that when we're searching for truth. We need to focus. Number 3, qualify your statements. So when we're making assertions, we want to be as specific and precise as possible. So if we say something happened, when did it happen? Where did it happen? If we're quoting someone, get the quote right. Number 4, always be willing to modify your position within a discussion. So if I'm discussing something with you, if there's a hint of truth in what you say, I want to concede that. I want to affirm that. I want to acknowledge that. And whenever I learn even a slight new truth, I modify my position. So even if we're having a discussion, I will say within discussion, let me change what I just said. Now that you've taught me something new, some truth, I'm going to change my position right now on the spot. There's nothing wrong about that. That's very healthy. I recently had a discussion with 2 teenagers here, and they changed my mind on certain points. And I bring this example up because anyone can change my mind. Even teenagers can change my mind because I'm looking for truth. And we followed these principles within the discussion. We were focused, weren't jumping around, we're being specific, and I was open to modifying what I know. Number 3, learn to be critical and recognize bias in media sources. Just as we said with regard to our treatment of police, there has to be a healthy respect of the media. We want to hold them to a very high standard of impartiality. I never used to think that the mainstream media would be biased. But 20 years ago, my opinion started changing. I noticed that whenever there was a pro-life march, hundreds of thousands of people, for example, in Washington, D.C., a lot of mainstream media wouldn't even cover that. And if it was covered, it would be covered in a disproportionately poor way. And then I've noticed over the years, I've paid attention, any values that are considered socially conservative are usually treated in a not equal way. Now, what about with regard to racism? I honestly thought there wouldn't be any bias on this topic. And I'd been happily watching global national news every day, just trying to learn the facts. But then I started to perceive what I thought of, is that bias? Are they not telling the whole story? I started noticing that they weren't reporting or giving enough attention to all the riots happening in the US, as I heard on other news outlets. So, with a team of people, having watched and checked every global national episode, George Floyd died on May 25th, and we started watching from May 27th until June 23rd, 28 days. And we noticed that Global National only covered the riots for 5 out of 28 days. And we calculated the total amount of minutes spent on racism. Only 11% of those minutes gave attention to the riots. Now, considering that by June 3rd, already 300 law enforcement personnel had been injured in the riots, 17 people innocently killed, including a number of Black Americans, these riots should have been given better treatment. I also saw 2 clips of 2 reporters doing what I would call is outright lying. And I'll show you this 1-minute clip from both of them. And I'll just set the scene, see if you can pick up on what I'm picking up on. In the first clip, the reporter will be with a caravan of cars, and he keeps on saying entirely peaceful, but he's saying they're also doing graffiti. But then he downplays it by saying other people are stopping them. But then he gets bottles thrown at him, people swear at him, but he keeps on insisting it's entirely peaceful. The second clip, the reporter has a building in the background burning. And he's saying it's not unruly. So here's the clip.
Not only protesters walking now, but they have several cars that have sort of joined the protest as well. And it's now just sort of a merry caravan. It is worth pointing out that it has been entirely peaceful, sometimes angry, but entirely peaceful. A few people doing some graffiti. When others saw them doing the graffiti, they would shut them down, make them stop doing it. Bottle thrown, which is not uncommon. So there is some of that, but for the most part, they have been very, very peaceful. They haven't been destroying anything. They like to take it out of the media, as everybody does, but rather than yell at us and throw stuff at us, not in a mean way.
Yeah.
And we'll be fine.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started.
So to put it in perspective, imagine if a bunch of us were in cars and let's say we were doing a pro-life caravan and we were throwing bottles and swearing at reporters, and then we're doing graffiti. Would the media would display it as these pro-lifers are entirely peaceful? Or if, let's say, there's a pro-family group and we were burning down a building, would the reporter say, it's not unruly? Now, this doesn't mean that every media outlet is not telling the truth, but I am now skeptical about what I'm being told by Global National, CNN, and MSNBC. Anything they say on racism, I feel I need to verify to check the other side of the story. And last point, the fourth point, Black Lives Matter. Should Catholics support it? And having talked to other people at these previous masses, it was a good discussion. And everything I present here, I just learned in the past week. I wasn't thinking about presenting on it, but I've just learned from these various other Catholic leaders. The largest group that takes this name, Black Lives Matter, is the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. They want to eliminate racism, but according to their website, and it's right on the About page, I had to check it myself to be sure, they advance the LGBT ideology and they seek, quote, to dismantle the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. And, quote, when we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, which means freeing ourselves from the mentality that heterosexuality is the default human sexual orientation. Deacon Harold Burke Sievers, he's a Black Catholic on EWTN, he said this: marching to protest the inequitable treatment of Black people by those in authority, that's good. However, the policies espoused by the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation on family and sexuality constitute a radical feminist agenda disguised as a movement for Black Lives Matter. No Catholic can support the national organization whatsoever. Gloria Purvis, another Black Catholic, she said, it's a mistake to say that Black Lives Matter, the organization, is the head of this movement. For me, as a devout Catholic, as a loyal daughter of the Church, I have no problem saying Black Lives Matter. I know it doesn't make me a member of the organization. That point is worth reemphasizing. Black lives do matter, and we should do all we can to stand up for them without supporting the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Purvis also said this: some Catholics hesitate to attend protests because they say that not only Black lives matter, but that all lives matter. Purvis explained that the phrase Black Lives Matter is not meant to devalue the lives of others, and while all lives do matter, she has observed that in practice in the US, what we have seen is that Black lives don't. I was shocked when I watched a 6-minute interview of the former president of the Greater New York Black Lives Matter group. His name is Hawk Newsome. 6-minute interview, unedited, but I was shocked at some of the things he said, and this is what he said. If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it, all right? I could be speaking figuratively, I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation. I don't condone, nor do I condemn rioting. I just want Black liberation and Black sovereignty by any means necessary. I was thrilled when I saw that the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, they distanced themselves from Newsome's comments. You have to give credit where credit is due. That's good. Then I started thinking a step deeper about this, and then I wondered, they're distancing themselves from his comments, but why didn't they condemn some of those comments? So why did they condemn the fact that he doesn't condemn rioting? Why didn't they condemn the phrase burning down the system, which he said could be literal, and his phrase by any means necessary? Because if anyone else had said these phrases, they would have been condemned. Because of the complexity of this issue, that's why there's a healthy debate right now, even among Catholics. Should we use the hashtag Black Lives Matter? We all agree we want to fight against racism, we need to, we must, but not supporting groups that advocate against the foundation of human marriage and family, which are critical for human flourishing. But there's a disagreement among Catholics. What are the implications of using the hashtag? On the one hand, to the average person, when we use the hashtag, we're just saying we're against racism. On the other hand, we could be, by using the hashtag, inadvertently supporting a group that has some very harmful moral principles. So it seems to me that what we should simply do is always be aware, what are we saying and to whom? And final point on this, Bishop Edward Braxton, a Black Catholic bishop, he wrote that most leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, they reject the church's teaching on sexuality and abortion. And he said that others in the movement are reluctant to work with the church because they think Catholics have not done enough to fight racism. But he still dialogues with them. Whenever he dialogues with their leaders, he presents to them the church's teaching on racism as well as on sexuality. And he said, all Catholics have an obligation to work for racial justice within the framework of Catholic teaching about the dignity of the human person and the sanctity of human life, and to work, above all, for conversion. So these three Catholic leaders, Deacon Harold Burke-Sievers, Gloria Purvis, and Bishop Braxton, they're showing us a way forward to end racism. Their search for truth while remaining faithful to Catholic Church teaching and acknowledging the real facts of racism and then mobilizing people to fight it, that's very inspiring. And it comes from their relationship with Jesus. These three leaders, they see the truth clearly because they love Jesus more than their family. They have taken up their cross and been misunderstood by many, and they have lost their life in the sense that they're constantly adapting themselves to the truth, who is Jesus Christ himself.